The stars were humming, not metaphorically, not poetically. They were humming in a minor seventh that made the hull of the smuggler's ship Mercy's Lament vibrate like the body of a cello someone had forgotten to mute. Elias Sato, Terran composer, fugitive, and according to the council warrant scrolling across every public screen in the spiral arm, Category 1 memetic hazard, sat strapped into the co-pilot cradle and listened to the universe sing the melody he had written in a refugee camp on Proxima IV when he was 19 years old. He had called the peace ashes still sing. He had never expected the ashes to answer back. The cockpit smelled of ozone, cheap synth coffee, and the faint copper tang of fear. His pilot, a six-limbed Vera named Kesh who had once smuggled refugees out of dying systems for a living, kept glancing at the nav console as if the numbers themselves were lying. Elias, Kesh rasped through the translator bead curled around his auditory ridge. Your song is inside the jump drive. The coils are resonating at exactly 432 Hz. That frequency is not supposed to exist in vacuum. Elias closed his eyes. He could feel it too, thrumming in his molars and the scar across his ribs where a council drone had grazed him 3 years ago. The stars were humming, and they were humming his grief, his stubborn refusal to let beauty die just because the galaxy had decided beauty was dangerous. He laughed once, short and cracked. They told us music was a weapon, he said. Turns out they were half right. 3 years earlier, the Galactic Harmony Council had declared all human art forms post-dating the 28th century, psychologically destabilizing to non-Terran neural architectures. Paintings induced seizures in the methane-breathing kale. Sculpture caused the silicon-based thread to fracture along emotional fault lines they didn't know they possessed. And music, human music with its impossible chords, its refusal to resolve neatly, its habit of asking questions the universe had spent 14 billion years avoiding, music drove entire species into religious frenzy or revolutionary violence. So the council did what any bureaucracy does when confronted with something it cannot control. It outlawed it. Every piano on Earth was melted into reactor shielding. Every violin became kindling. Every voice that tried to sing in public was silenced with neural dampers, or, if the singer was unlucky, a quiet disappearance into the black site orchestras, where they forced prisoners to compose safe tones that tasted like ash and obedience. Elias had been 29 when the enforcement choir came for him. He remembered the lead harmonist, a tall avian keth with feathers the color of moonlight, leveling a sonic restraints pistol and saying, almost sadly, "Your compositions exceed allowable emotional bandwidth, citizen. Please come quietly." He had not come quietly. Instead, he ran. He ran through the ventilation shafts of New Kyoto Orbital, fingers bleeding on the rungs, humming the forbidden ashes still sing under his breath because if he stopped humming he would scream, and screaming would bring them faster. He ran until Kesh found him half dead in a cargo crate of frozen ramen, offered him a cup of real coffee and said, "Heard your requiem on the dark channels, human. Damn near made me believe in something again. Need a ride." That had been the beginning. Now 3 years of running, 3 years of slipping data seeds of music into pirate broadcasts, 3 years of watching alien species wake up weeping to chords they had no cultural context for, 3 years had led to this moment, the stars themselves refusing to stay silent. The Mercy's Lament dropped out of jump space with a shudder that felt like applause. Kesh's 6 hands flew across the controls. Council blockade ahead. 6 dreadnoughts. They're hailing us. The forward screen bloomed with the face of High Harmonist Vale, the same Keth who had once pointed a pistol at Elias' heart. His feathers were grayer now, but the eyes were still winter. "Elias Sato," Vale said, voice perfectly modulated, perfectly calm. "Surrender the contraband frequencies in yourself. The Council offers amnesty, refuse, and we will decompress your vessel and every soul aboard. The choice is logical." Elias unstrapped, floated to the comm pickup, and met those ancient eyes. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said softly. "It was never about the notes. It was about the silence you tried to sell us instead." He reached into the pocket of his worn flight jacket and pulled out a tiny hollow drive no bigger than a fingernail. On it was the master track of Ashes Still Sing, the one he had refined for 3 years in asteroid hideouts and smuggler dens, the one that now lived inside nebulae and stellar nurseries, that had taught gas clouds to sigh in 4-part harmony. Held it up between thumb and forefinger. "You want this?" he asked. "Come and take it." Vale's beak parted, the first crack in composure Elias had ever seen. Behind the high harmonist, the bridge crew's feathers were ruffling in unconscious rhythm, heads tilting to a beat none of them had been trained to hear. Elias smiled, small and tired and fierce. He slotted the drive into the ship's broadcast array. "Kesh," he said, "open every frequency, not just council bands, everything, emergency, pirate. Prayer channels, even the deep space whales song the kale use for mating, all of it." Kesh's central eyes widened. "That'll paint us across half the galaxy." "Good," Elias said. "Let them all hear what happens when you try to outlaw a soul." He hit transmit. For For one heartbeat there was silence, then the universe inhaled. Every speaker, every comm bead, every gravity wave detector on every ship in the blockade began to sing. Not loud, not violent, just inevitable. The first four notes of Ash's still sing rolled out like dawn over water. On the Council flagship concordant measure, a junior ensign, a young Thren whose crystalline lattice had never known vibration outside approved parameters, suddenly fractured along a perfect fifth and began to weep liquid diamond. On a mining rig in the outer belt, an old human engineer who had not heard music in 12 years dropped his welder and whispered, "Jesus Christ, they're playing our song." The cockpit of the Mercy's Lament, Kesh's 6 hands froze above the controls. The Vera's mane of sensory tendrils lifted like seaweed in a tide none of them had felt coming. "Elias," he whispered, voice thick, "the blockade, they're not firing. They can't. Their targeting arrays are singing." Elias floated to the viewport and looked out at 6 dreadnoughts the size of small moons, weapons hot, shields blazing, and every single one of them trembling to the rhythm of a human heart that refused to die. He pressed his palm to the glass. Out there, past the warships, past the nebulae now glowing soft gold with sympathetic resonance, the stars kept humming. He felt it then, not as theology, not as doctrine, but as the simplest truth he had ever known. The same voice that had spoken light into being had also spoken music. And no council, no empire, no silence imposed by fear could ever unspeak it. Elias closed his eyes, tears weightless in the cabin air. "Thank you," he whispered to the dark between stars, "for letting us be loud enough to matter." Alarms began to scream across the blockade, not of war, but of wonder. And somewhere in the deep, something vast and ancient and listening turned its attention toward a single smuggler's ship carrying one forbidden song, and the fabric of spacetime itself leaned in to hear the next verse. The alarms wailed like wounded beasts, but they weren't the sharp claxons of incoming fire. They were melodic, twisting into the opening refrain of Ash's Still Sing, as if the dreadnoughts' AI systems had decided rebellion was better than obedience. Elias Sato pressed his forehead against the viewport of the Mercy's Lament, watching the blockade fracture before his eyes, not with explosions, but with harmony. Kesh's 6 hands danced frantically over the controls, his sensory tendrils quivering like harp strings plucked by an unseen wind. "They're powering down weapons," the Vera hissed, his translator bead crackling with static. "All 6 ships, shields dropping. Their comms, they're broadcasting your song back at us, Elias, amplified. It's looping through their hull integrity systems." Elias nodded, his breath fogging the glass in zero-G wisps. He could feel the music in his bones, a vibration that synced with his pulse, as if the universe had finally found its rhythm section. But beneath the wonder, doubt gnawed at him like a persistent chord that refused to resolve. What if this was just a glitch? What if the stars humming his melody were coincidence, a freak quantum echo, and not the miracle his tired heart desperately wanted it to be? He had lost so much, his family on Earth, scattered to refugee fleets when the Council glassed the art districts, his faith in a galaxy that seemed designed to crush the small and the singing. Yet here he was, a man who once composed lullabies for orphan colonies, now accused of weaponizing beauty. "They're hailing again," Kesh said, switching the forward screen. High Harmonist Vale's face reappeared, but the composure was gone. His feathers stood rigid, eyes dilated in a way Elias recognized from the old holovids of Keth during their ancient mating rituals, overwhelmed by sensation. "Sato," Vale croaked, voice no longer modulated but raw, "cease transmission. Your contraband is infiltrating our neural nets. My crew is experiencing unauthorized empathy surges. We cannot function." Elias floated closer to the pickup, his face filling the screen. "Empathy," he echoed, tasting the word like victory. "That's what you called destabilizing. That's what you banned. Because humans feel too much, right? We cry at sunsets and rage at injustice and sing when everything's falling apart. And now your perfect order is cracking, because we dared to remind you that existence isn't just equations and silence." On the concordant measure, alarms blended into choral undertones. Elias imagined the bridge, crystalline Thren officers fracturing into prismatic light shows, methane breathers exhaling symphonies of gas that danced like auroras. He had seen it before in secret underground concerts on fringe worlds, aliens discovering human music for the first time, their rigid societies shattering under the weight of unfiltered emotion. Kesh's voice cut through. "Jump drives charging, but Elias, look at the sensors. The nebulae are responding. Gas clouds are compressing, forming standing waves at your frequency. It's like the universe is building an amplifier." Elias turned to the viewport. Beyond the blockade, the Vale Nebula glowed not with stellar fire, but with a soft, pulsating light, its tendrils curling to the beat. Stars winked in time, binaries pulsing like heartbeats synced across light years. He felt a shiver, not of cold, but of awe, the kind that made you whisper prayers you thought you'd forgotten. Not luck, he thought. Someone wanted this to happen, wanted us to be heard. 3 years ago, in the refugee camp on Proxima IV, Elias had composed Ash's Still Sing after watching a colony burn. The council had deemed the settlement harmonically impure because its inhabitants insisted on street musicians and holographic operas. He had buried his sister that day, her voice silenced forever, and under a sky choked with fallout, he had hummed the melody into existence. A simple thing, grief wrapped in major thirds, defiance in the unresolved suspension at the end. He hadn't prayed then, not aloud, but in the silence after, staring at the stars, he had whispered, "If you're listening, give us a sign. Show us we're not alone in this vast, empty quiet." Now the stars were answering. The Mercy's lament shuddered as a harmonic wave hit, not destructive but embracing, like a cosmic hug from something older than time. Kesh yelped, his tendrils glowing faintly. It's in the life support. Oxygen recyclers are humming the bass line. Elias laughed, genuine this time, the sound raw in his throat. Then let's dance with it. Plot a course through the blockade. If they want to sing along, we'll give them the full symphony. Kesh hesitated, his compound eyes reflecting the glowing nebula. You're mad human, but I've flown with madmen before. They win more often than the sane. The ship accelerated, weaving between dreadnoughts that now floated inert, their crews lost in reverie. One ship, the Equilibrium Oath, began to transmit a counter-melody, an attempt at dissonance to disrupt the resonance. But it failed. The stars countered with a swell of strings from nowhere, violins of solar wind and cellos of dark matter, drowning the interference in a tide of pure, unyielding beauty. Elias gripped the console, knuckles white. Internal conflict tore at him. The composer who wanted to create, versus the fugitive who knew every note broadcast was a beacon for hunters. What if this dooms us all, he wondered. What if my song becomes the galaxy's funeral march? But then he remembered his sister's last words, whispered in a hospital pod, "Keep singing, Eli, even if it breaks everything." He pushed the doubt down, replaced it with resolve, the human specialty. As they slipped past the last dreadnought, Vale's voice crackled over open channels, not commanding but pleading. "Sato, what is this? My people are weeping. They see colors in the music. They feel loss. And hope, make it stop." Elias leaned into the calm. "It's called living, harmonist. Humans invented it when the first cave dwelled under stars and wondered why they burned so bright. We can't stop it, neither can you." The Mercy's lament cleared the blockade, engines flaring toward the nebula's heart. Behind them, the dreadnoughts began to move, not in pursuit, but in formation, like an honor guard trailing a procession. Kesh whooped, a Vera sound like wind through crystal caves. "We're clear." But sensors show, planets are tuning in, entire systems. The dark nets are exploding with shares of your track. Aliens are remixing it, Elias, adding their own voices. Elias sank into the co-pilot's seat, exhaustion crashing over him like a finale. He pulled a small crucifix from under his shirt, a relic from Earth, silver worn smooth by generations of fingers. He hadn't worn it openly since the bans, but now, in this moment of fragile triumph, he clutched it. Thank you, he thought again, not to the stars, but to the one who hung them there, for the mercy in the melody. The nebula enveloped them, gas clouds parting like curtains on a grand stage. Inside, hidden from council eyes, was their destination, Harmony Haven, a rogue asteroid station where fugitives composed in secret, where humans and defectors alike dreamed of a galaxy that danced instead of marched. But as they dove deeper, the humming intensified. The stars weren't just echoing now. They were improvising. A new note entered the melody, deep and resonant from the core of the nebula itself. A black hole's whisper turned song. Elias' eyes widened. "It's rewriting the laws," he murmured. "Gravity's dancing to my tune." Kesh's tendrils froze. Then what happens when the council hears the encore? Ahead, the asteroid loomed, lights flickering in Morse code of welcome. But the humming grew louder, pulling at the fabric of space like a thread unraveling the universe's tapestry. And in the silence between notes, Elias felt it, a vast intelligence watching, not judging, but waiting for humanity to choose the next verse in this symphony of defiance. The Mercy's lament slid into the hollowed-out heart of asteroid 77 Theta like a needle into the vein of a dying god. Docking clamps locked with a clang that echoed the final cymbal crash of a symphony no one had dared finish for 300 years. Elias unstrapped, legs trembling from adrenaline and zero-G, and felt the asteroid's artificial gravity kiss his boots like an old friend who had waited too long. Kesh powered down the engines, but the ship kept humming, not metaphor. The hull plating itself vibrated in soft, perfect fifths as if the metal had learned harmony while they flew. "Welcome home, composer," a voice crackled over internal comms. "Female human, warm with smoke and laughter. Dock 9 is yours. Try not to make the entire rock fall in love with you on the first night." Elias smiled despite everything. Mara Chen, Old Earth Philharmonic, first chair cello, smuggler queen of Harmony Haven. They had never met in person, only traded encrypted scores across the dark nets. She had once told him, "Your music makes my scars remember they used to be skin." He had never known how to answer that. They cycled through the airlock into a cavern so vast it had weather. Clouds of vapor drifted beneath bioluminescent lichen that pulsed in time with ashes still sing. The asteroid had become a cathedral of sound. Every corridor, every hydroponic garden, every makeshift stage tuned to the same forbidden frequency. Hundreds of beings moved through the haze. humans with tattooed sheet music on their arms, Thren whose crystalline bodies refracted the melody into rainbows, a trio of Kale floating in methane bubbles singing counterpoint through modulated exhalations. A child no older than 10, hair shaved on one side to reveal a neural damper scar, ran up and pressed a paper flower into Elias' hand. It was made from shredded council edict pages. On the petals, someone had written in crayon, "Thank you for giving us back the sky." He knelt, throat tight. "What's your name, kid?" "Rafa," the boy said. "I used to dream in silence. Now I dream in color." Behind him, Mara Chen emerged from the mist like a conductor stepping onto a war-torn stage. Tall, mid-40s, one eye replaced by a targeting monocle that glinted red. She carried a cello case slung across her back like a rifle. "Elias Sato," she said, voice rough as unrosined bow. "You look like hell. Feel worse," he admitted. She studied him a long moment, then pulled him into a hug that cracked his ribs and his composure in the same breath. Over her shoulder, he saw Kesh being swarmed by Vera smugglers who touched his tendrils in reverence, whispering, "You flew through the choir blockade." "You're a legend now," Mara released him. "Come on, the council's not the only one who wants to talk." She led him through corridors where people had painted entire movements of his requiem on the walls, notes glowing with phosphor grief made visible. A Thren choir stood in a circle, bodies chiming like glass bells as they attempted a human hymn and failed beautifully. An old man with a violin missing 2 strings played the melody on one knee, tears cutting channels through the dust on his cheeks. Elias stopped walking. His chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with recycled air. Mara noticed. "They've been waiting for you," she said quietly. "Every refugee who made it here carried a fragment of your song. We stitched them together like a quilt made of hope and middle fingers. You gave them permission to feel again." "I didn't mean to start a revolution," he whispered. "Liar," she said, not unkindly. "You absolutely did." They reached the central chamber, an amphitheater carved from the asteroid's nickel-iron heart. Thousands filled the tiers, not just humans. Every species the council had tried to protect from emotion sat shoulder to tentacle to crystalline limb. A hush fell when Elias stepped onto the stage. He had faced concert halls on Earth that seated 20,000. None had ever looked at him like this, like he was both messiah and matchstick. Mara handed him a microphone that looked suspiciously like a repurposed shock baton. "No pressure," she said. "Just tell them why we're still singing." Elias stared at the sea of faces. His prepared words died in his throat. He thought of Rafa's paper flower, of stars learning harmony, of his sister's last breath tasting of smoke and lullabies. He clicked the mic on. "I'm not a prophet," he began, voice raw. "I'm just a man who refused to let them murder beauty. They told us music was dangerous because it made you remember you had a soul. They were right. Souls are dangerous. They ask questions. They fall in love. They refuse to kneel when someone says silence is safety." A low murmur rippled through the crowd, approval and grief braided together. "I lost my family," he continued. "My home, my faith for a while. But every time I thought about giving up, I'd remember something my mother taught me when I was 5. She said, Eli, the universe is big and cold and mostly empty. But every now and then, God leans down and hums. And when he does, everything that's alive hums back. That's how we know we belong." He swallowed hard. "I stopped believing in God for a long time. Too much burning. Too many children learning to whisper instead of sing. But out there today," his voice cracked. "The stars hummed back. Not because of me, because of us. Because something out there heard a species on its knees and decided a requiem was not the same as surrender." Silence. Absolute. Then a single Thren in the upper tier began to chime. A pure, bell-like above middle C another joined. Then a Kale exhaled a bass note that made the floor vibrate. Within seconds, the entire chamber was singing Ashes Still Sing without a single instrument. 10,000 alien throats discovering what harmony felt like when it was born of shared defiance. Elias stood in the center of it, tears streaming, and let the wave carry him. When it ended, the silence that followed was heavier than any applause he'd ever known. Mara leaned close. "There's something else," she said. "We picked up a transmission an hour ago, encrypted on a frequency only humans use for prayer." She handed him a small holopad. On it played a grainy video. A young woman in a council prison jumpsuit, face bruised but defiant. She couldn't have been older than 20. Behind her, bars of light pulsed in time with a melody only Elias recognized, the children's round he had written in the Proxima camps. The woman looked straight into the camera. "This is Operative Lena Park, Cell Block 19, Luna Reclamation Facility. If you're receiving this, composer, know that Section 7 still sings. We have 32 choristers left. They're coming for us at dawn. Play something loud enough to drown out the silence when we go. Tell the universe we were here. Tell it we were not afraid." The message ended. Elias' hand shook so hard the pad nearly slipped. Mara's voice was gentle steel. "We can't reach Luna in time, not physically, but you can reach them another way." He stared at her, understanding blooming like grief. "You want me to broadcast the finale," he said. "The movement I never finished, the one that breaks every law of physics we know." She nodded. "The resonance is growing, Elias. The universe is listening now. If you finish Ashes Still Sing, if you give it the resolution humanity never got, maybe the song can reach farther than ships ever could." He looked out at the crowd still glowing with aftersong, at Kesh who had tears on all 6 cheeks, at Rafa clutching his paper flower like a talisman. Internal conflict tore him open, the terror of dooming prisoners by painting a bigger target, versus the certainty that doing nothing doomed their souls. He closed his eyes. Lord, he prayed for the first time in years, raw and childlike. If you're still humming, help me choose the note that sets them free. When he opened his eyes, decision burned bright as any star. Get me a studio, he said, and open every transmitter we have. We're going to write the last movement together, tonight. Mara grinned like a wolf hearing the hunt begin. As they moved toward the recording chamber, the asteroid itself began to sing louder, deeper, as if the iron in its bones remembered it had once been part of a star that exploded just to scatter beauty across the dark. And somewhere, 32 prisoners on a dead moon lifted their heads, because for the first time in months, the walls of their cells were vibrating with a melody that sounded like sunrise. The recording chamber was a scar inside the asteroid, an old mining shaft lined with sound-dampening foam that had long since turned the color of dried blood. Now the foam glowed faintly, pulsing like the walls themselves had learned to breathe in 6/8 time. Elias stood at the center, barefoot on cold iron, surrounded by instruments that should not exist. A Steinway Grand rebuilt from melted-down dreadnought plating, a cello strung with monomolecular wire stolen from Council jump drives, a pipe organ whose pipes were repurposed oxygen tanks that once fed dying colonies. Every surface had been tuned to a equals 432 Hz, the forbidden human tuning the Council had outlawed as psycho-acoustically aggressive. Mara sealed the blast door behind them. Outside, 10,000 souls waited in absolute silence. No one spoke, no one needed to, they were the orchestra now. Elias rolled his shoulders, feeling the weight of every ghost who had ever sung under persecution. His sister, Rafa's parents, Lena Park and her 31 fellow prisoners waiting for dawn on Luna. He could almost hear their heartbeats through the vacuum, a faint percussion section counting down the last hours. Kesh entered last, carrying a hollow rig the size of a coffin. Linked every transmitter from here to the core, the Vera said, voice hushed with something close to prayer. When you hit record, the signal will ride the resonance wave you started. It'll reach Luna in under 9 minutes, after that, everywhere. Elias nodded. 9 minutes. That was how long he had to finish a lifetime's worth of grief and give it wings. He sat at the Steinway. The keys were ivory reclaimed from poached elephants on old Earth preserves. Someone had smuggled them off planet before the bans. They felt warm under his fingers, as if the animals themselves approved. He did not speak. There was nothing left to say. He began to play. The opening of Ashes Still Sing was familiar now, the minor seventh that had haunted nebulae and cracked dreadnoughts. But tonight he did not play it alone. Mara drew her bow across the cello and added a line so low it felt like tectonic plates mourning. A Thren choir, crystals hovering in perfect formation, chimed in with overtones that tasted like starlight on the tongue. Kesh's 6 hands triggered percussion samples, gunshots from the Luna uprising, children laughing on Proxima before the fire, the last heartbeat of Elias' mother recorded on a wrist med unit. Every sound was human once. Every sound was sacred. Elias closed his eyes and let the music take him under. He saw Luna's gray regolith under Earth's blue ghost. He saw Lena Park standing in her cell, hands pressed to the wall as the first notes arrived. He saw her smile, small, fierce, unbreakable. The final movement had no name yet. He had always been afraid to write it. Resolution felt like surrender, but tonight's surrender was not the same as silence. His fingers found the melody he had carried since childhood, the lullaby his mother sang when nightmares came. He layered it over the requiem like forgiveness over rage. The Thren answered with a chord that should have been impossible, 11 tones stacked in a way that bent gravity inside the chamber. Coffee cups floated, tears hung in the air like liquid pearls. Elias leaned into the microphone, voice cracked and human and unafraid. This is for the 32, he said, and for every voice they tried to bury. He began to sing, not in any language the Council recognized. In the oldest one humanity still possessed, raw vowel and grief and glory, the asteroid shook, not from engines, from resonance. Outside in the amphitheater, 10,000 beings felt their chest's cavity resonate with a note lower than any bass singer had ever reached. A Kale elder collapsed, methane tears freezing into snowflakes that drifted upward instead of down. A human grandmother clutched her husband's hand and whispered, "That's my wedding song, he's giving it back to us." On Luna 9 minutes later, the walls of cell block 19 began to sing. Lena Park felt it first in her teeth, then in her bones. The forbidden frequency poured through the ventilation like warm rain. Around her, 31 prisoners, some missing fingers, some missing hope, lifted their heads. The neural dampers implanted in their skulls sparked and died, overloaded by a harmony no machine had been built to withstand. Lena pressed both palms to the wall and laughed through tears. "He did it," she whispered. "The composer kept his promise. The guards' Keth enforcers in white armor staggered as their sonic restraints pistols began playing the melody backwards. One dropped his weapon and simply listened, feathers fluffing in involuntary awe. Back in the asteroid, Elias reached the bridge, the moment every composer dreads and craves, the place where sorrow must become something else or the piece dies. He hesitated, his hands hovered. In that silence, doubt rushed in like cold water. What if I resolve it wrong? What if hope is the lie, not the truth? Mara's bow stopped mid-stroke. She met his eyes across the glowing keys. Eli, she said softly, using the childhood nickname no one had spoken in 15 years, play what you know is true. Not what you're afraid might be. He looked at the crucifix beneath his shirt, warm now against his skin. He thought of stars learning to hum, of a little boy giving him a paper flower, of a woman on a dead moon who had asked for one loud song before dying. He played the resolution. It was not triumphant. It was not soft. It was the sound of a man who had lost everything, choosing to believe the loss was not the end of the story. A single major chord, bright, wounded, defiant, rose out of the requiem like sunrise through smoke, but it did not resolve neatly. It hung suspended, refusing to close, because humanity was not finished, because the song was not over. The asteroid's transmitters flared white-hot. The signal leapt. Across the solar system, pirate relays caught it and flung it farther. Across the spiral arm, sleeping colonies woke to music for the first time in generations. On Earth herself, glass-scarred, silent Earth, ancient radio telescopes that had been converted to surveillance arrays began to weep electromagnetic tears as the melody rewrote their purpose. And in the council capital, 300 light-years away, the high choir chamber cracked along a perfect diagonal fracture when the first note arrived. High harmonist Vale stood alone in the empty chamber, feathers trembling as the resolution washed over him. He had ordered the execution of millions to preserve silence. Now silence was the one thing the galaxy refused to give him. He sank to his knees among the shards of crystal that had once been the council's great harmonic bell, and for the first time in his long, ordered life, he wept without knowing why. Back in the asteroid, the final chord sustained for 37 seconds, longer than any human lung could hold, longer than physics should allow. When it finally faded, the recording chamber was silent except for the soft patter of tears hitting iron. Elias' hands fell from the keys. He was shaking so hard Mara had to catch him before he collapsed. "It's done," he whispered. "God, it's done." Kesh's voice came over the intercom, trembling. "Composer, you need to see the scopes." They stumbled into the observation gallery. Outside the viewport, the nebula had become a cathedral of light. Gas clouds formed perfect standing waves, golden, violet, crimson, spelling out the final chord in filaments visible from 100 light-years away. Stars that had burned steady for billions of years now pulsed gently, like lighthouses acknowledging a ship finally come home. Mara gripped his arm so hard it bruised. "Eli," she breathed, "look at Luna." A new star burned in the night, small, brief, glorious. The Luna Reclamation Facility had become a nova of raw sound made visible, not destruction. Liberation, the resonance had shattered the dampening fields, overloaded the power grid, and turned every prison wall into an amplifier for the final chord. 32 voices had sung themselves free. Elias sank to his knees on the observatory floor, forehead pressed to the cold transparasteel. He did not cheer. He did not cry. He simply whispered over and over the only prayer he had left. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Behind him, 10,000 beings began to sing the lullaby his mother had taught him, the one now woven forever into the final movement. Their voices rose through the asteroid, through the nebula, through the widening wave of light that was racing toward the council capital at speeds no ship could match. And in the vast darkness between galaxies, something ancient and listening smiled a smile too large for physics, and added its own voice, wordless, boundless, older than names, to the chorus of a single stubborn species that had refused to let the music die. The nebula's light lingered on Elias Sato's face like a benediction, painting his scars gold and his exhaustion holy. He knelt in the observation gallery of asteroid 77 Theta, forehead still pressed to the transparasteel, whispering thanks to a god he had doubted too long. Below, the amphitheater thrummed with 10,000 voices singing the lullaby now woven into ashes still sing, a melody that had freed 32 prisoners on Luna and turned a prison into a star. But the victory tasted like ash in his mouth, because he knew what came next. Mara Chen's boots echoed as she crouched beside him. Her targeting monocle glowed red, scanning feeds only she could see. "Eli," she said, voice low, "the council's waking up. Their war fleet, Dolan Choir, is mobilizing from the capital. 12 Singularity-class carriers, each with 1,000 drones. They're locking onto the resonance wave. They know it's coming from here." Elias lifted his head, eyes heavy with the weight of miracles and consequences. "How long?" 6 hours, she said. "Maybe 5 if they burn their cores hot. They'll glass this rock and everyone on it unless we move." Kesh's 6 hands twitched at the console nearby, pulling up tactical displays. The Vera's sensory tendrils drooped, heavy with fatigue and something else, reverence maybe or fear. The signal's still spreading, he rasped. Planets are joining in, fringe colonies, pirate fleets. Even some council outposts are defecting, broadcasting your finale instead of compliance pings. But the Eidolon Choir, it's not like the blockade. These ships are purpose-built to enforce silence. Their hulls are dampened against resonance. Elias stood, legs unsteady, and looked out at the nebula. Its golden waves still pulsed with the final chord, but now faint ripples of dissonance crept in council counter-frequencies, trying to choke the song before it reached their heart world. He felt a pang, not just of fear, but of guilt. Every note he had played had painted a larger target on Harmony Haven, on Rafa, the boy with the paper flower. On Mara, who had bet her life on his music, on every soul who had dared to hum in the dark. He gripped the crucifix beneath his shirt, its edges biting into his palm. Did I do this right? He asked the silence behind the stars. Or did I just doom us all for a song? Mara's hand landed on his shoulder, firm as a conductor's baton. Stop it, she said, reading his face like a score. You didn't start this war. You just gave us a reason to fight it. He met her eyes, one human, one machine, and saw no doubt only fire. What's the plan then? He asked. Run, fight, pray. All three, she said, grinning like a smuggler who had just spotted an unguarded cargo bay. But first we need you to do what you do best, sing. Elias blinked. Another broadcast, now they'll triangulate us in minutes. Not a broadcast, she said. A performance, live here for everyone on this rock. The resonance is strongest where the music's born. If we amplify it, really amplify it, maybe we can push the wave far enough to hit the capital before their fleet hits us. Kesh's tendrils perked up. She's right, the nebula's acting like a natural resonator. If we channel the performance through the asteroid's core, it could scale the signal exponentially, reach every system between here and the core. Elias rubbed his face, exhaustion warring with the stubborn spark that had kept him running for 3 years. And the fleet, Mara's monocle flickered. We've got some surprises for them. Harmony Haven's been hiding more than musicians. She led him back to the amphitheater, where the crowd had not dispersed. They stood in clusters, human and alien, some praying, some sharpening smuggled plasma blades, some teaching children the lullaby's words in languages older than Earth's sun. Rafa sat cross-legged on the floor, folding more paper flowers from council edicts, his small hands steady despite the coming storm. When Elias stepped onto the stage, a hush fell like gravity returning. 10,000 pairs of eyes, compound, crystalline, bioluminescent, locked onto him. He felt naked, not as a composer, but as a man who had dared to believe beauty could outlast tyranny. Mara handed him the shock baton microphone. No pressure, she said again, but this time her voice cracked, betraying the fear she hid behind bravado. Elias took a breath, tasting iron and recycled air. He thought of Lena Park's smile in the prison video, of stars pulsing like heartbeats, of his mother whispering that God hummed when the universe was born. This isn't a concert, he said into the mic, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. This is a promise. The council thinks they can silence us. They think silence is order, that feeling is chaos. But we're not chaos. We're the part of the universe that learned to sing back when it called our name. And tonight we're going to sing so loud the stars themselves will carry our voices to the heart of their empire. A cheer rose, not wild, but resolute, like a choir finding its pitch before the first note. He turned to the makeshift orchestra assembling behind him, Mara with her cello, a Thren quartet tuning their crystal bodies like living xylophones, a Kale elder exhaling bass notes through a methane harmonizer, Kesh at a hacked synthesizer, layering percussion from war zones and lullabies. And in the front row, Rafa, holding a single drumstick and a salvaged fuel canister, ready to keep time. Elias raised his hands. The first note was his, a single piano key struck in the asteroid's core, amplified through kilometers of iron until the entire rock vibrated like a tuning fork. The nebula outside flared brighter, its waves aligning into perfect sine curves. Then the orchestra joined. Mara's cello sang of loss so deep it carved rivers in the soul. The Thren chimed hope that cut through despair like a blade. The Kale's bass was the weight of centuries choosing to stand rather than kneel. And Rafa's drumbeat, small, fierce, relentless, was the pulse of a child who refused to believe the dark was forever. Elias conducted without a baton, hands weaving patterns only his heart understood. He did not play Ashes Still Sing again. This was new, a movement born of this moment, of 10,000 souls breathing as one. He called it the unsilenced in his mind, though he would never speak the name aloud. The music grew. It spilled out of the amphitheater, through the asteroid's corridors into the nebula's heart. The rock itself began to resonate at a frequency that made loose bolts float and hair stand on end. Outside, the nebula's light bent into shapes no telescope had ever seen, spirals, fractals, the faint outline of a hand reaching across light years. In the council capital, High Harmonist Vale felt the first tremor in his bones. He stood in the ruins of the high choir chamber, surrounded by enforcers demanding orders, but he could not speak. The melody was inside him now, not as sound but as something deeper, a vibration that made his feathers pulse with colors he had no name for. He looked up at the cracked dome and saw stars winking in time with a rhythm he had spent his life trying to erase. On a fringe world called Elysium, a human farmer stopped tilling ash-soaked fields and listened as his ancient radio, banned, hidden, beloved, began to sing the unsilenced. He fell to his knees in the dirt, not in surrender but in awe, and whispered, "This can't just be an accident. Someone wanted us to hear this." Aboard the Eidolon Choir flagship, a junior Keth pilot hesitated over the fire controls. Her targeting array was singing, not with static, but with a melody that reminded her of the nesting songs her clutch mother had sung before the council outlawed them. She powered down her weapons and said to no one, "Not luck. Someone wanted me to live." Back in the asteroid, Elias felt the music lift him out of himself. He was no longer a man, but a conduit. The nebula was no longer gas and dust, but a choir. The stars were no longer burning spheres, but voices in a harmony too vast for mortal ears. He saw it then, not with eyes, but with something deeper, a presence behind the music, not human, not alien, but the quiet intelligence that had strung the first note of creation across the void. It did not speak. It did not command. It simply listened, and in its listening, it gave permission for the song to be. The performance reached its peak, a chord so bright it hurt to hear, so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. The nebula exploded into light, not destructive but radiant, a wave of resonance that raced toward the council capital faster than any ship could follow. Elias lowered his hands. The silence that followed was not empty, it was alive. Mara's cello bow fell to her side. Rafa's drumstick clattered to the floor. 10,000 chests heaved as one. Kesh's voice crackled over the intercom. The wave's gone superluminal, it's rewriting physics. The fleet's still coming, but they're slowing. Their dampeners can't handle the signal. Elias looked out at the crowd, at Rafa's wide eyes, at Mara's trembling hands. He wanted to say something profound, but all that came was, "We did it." Mara laughed, raw and broken. "Not yet, composer, but we're damn close." Outside, the nebula pulsed one final time, and a new star was born not from fusion, but from sound made light. And in the council capital, the first cracks appeared in the foundations of the silent spire, the galaxy's tallest monument to order, as the ground itself began to hum a human song. The asteroid rocked like a bell struck by the fist of God. Red emergency strobes painted the corridors blood and fire. Elias Sato ran barefoot through Harmony Haven's arteries, lungs burning, crucifix slapping against his chest with every footfall. Behind him, the amphitheater was emptying in perfect, terrible order. No panic, only the calm of people who had already accepted they might die singing. Mara's voice boomed over the intercom, steady as a metronome. "All non-combatants to the core shelters. Musicians to your stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is the song we chose." Elias burst into the tactical cavern, a hollowed-out geode glittering with hacked council holoscreens. Kesh stood at the center, 6 arms flying across 3 consoles at once, tendrils glowing white-hot with data. 4 minutes to intercept, the Vera said without looking up. Eidolon Choir dropped out of jump early. They're riding the resonance wake like it's a leash. Smart bastards. Elias stared at the main display. 12 Singularity-class carriers hung in formation, black silhouettes against the nebula's dying auroras, each one a cathedral of silence built to murder sound. Their prows were opening, massive dampening arrays unfolding like iron flowers. "They're going to try to swallow the wave," Mara said, entering behind him, cello case slung like a rifle. "Flood the entire sector with counter-resonance. If they succeed, every note we just sang gets erased, retroactively, like it never happened." Elias felt the old terror rise, the same one that had choked him the night the enforcement choir took his sister. He tasted copper. His hands shook. Mara grabbed his chin, forced him to meet her eyes. "Listen to me, Eli. You do not get to freeze now. You started this. We finish it together." He swallowed, nodded once. "What's the play?" Kesh spun a hologram toward them. The asteroid's core, an ancient nickel-iron sphere the size of a city block, glowed crimson. "We turn the entire rock into an instrument," the Vera said. "Route every transmitter, every power conduit, every grav plating through the core. When the dampening wave hits, we don't block it. We sing through it, use their own silence as a string." Mara's grin was feral. "Turn their weapon into our amplifier." Elias felt something settle in his chest, not peace but purpose. "How long to rig it?" 2 minutes, Kesh said. "Maybe 1 if we stop talking." They ran, corridors blurred. Humans and aliens worked side by side with the fluid grace of people who had practiced this moment in nightmares for years. Thren fused their crystalline bodies into power relays, becoming living capacitors. Kale vented methane into the coolant lines to supercool the conduits. Children passed cables like bucket brigades, singing the lullaby under their breath to keep time. Elias reached the core chamber last. It was beautiful in the way cathedrals and bomb shelters are beautiful, vast, hollow, sacred, and doomed. The nickel-iron sphere hung suspended in magnetic fields, its surface etched with centuries of mining scars that now looked like musical staves. At its heart floated the Steinway, wired directly into the rock with cables thick as pythons. Mara was already there, bow in one hand, detonator in the other. She tossed him a headset. "You conduct. I'll keep us alive long enough to finish the piece." He put it on. Every musician left in the asteroid, 311 souls, appeared as glowing avatars in his vision, instruments ready, faces calm. Rafa's small icon blinked in the corner. He was in the shelter, but someone had patched his fuel can drum through the main feed. The boy's voice came through, steady. "I'm ready, Mr. Elias." Elias closed his eyes. He could feel the Eidolon choir now, a cold, crushing pressure at the edge of perception, like the silence before a scream. He raised his hands. "On my mark," he said, voice steady for the first time in days. "We don't fight the silence, we baptize it." The fleet fired. A wave of pure negation rolled toward the asteroid, blacker than space, heavier than gravity, designed to unmake vibration itself. Inside every ship of the Eidolon choir, crews wore neural shrouds that filtered out all frequency, all emotion, all memory of song. Elias felt it hit the outer hull like a tidal wave of nothing. He struck the first note. The Steinway's hammer hit a string that was no longer ivory and steel, but the asteroid's molten heart. The sound that came out was not sound. It was creation reversing entropy. 311 musicians answered instantly. Cello, crystal, methane bass, child's drum, human voices braided with alien throats. The dampening wave met the music and shattered. Not metaphor. The blackness fractured into prismatic light as the resonance used the council's own weapon as a soundboard. Every decibel of attempted silence became a string the humans pulled tighter. Inside the Eidolon choir flagship final measure, high harmonist veil tore off his neural shroud the moment the counter wave reversed. The melody poured into his unprotected mind like molten gold. He saw his entire life, every execution order, every silenced world, and felt it judged, not by anger, but by sorrow so vast it broke him open. He fell to his knees on the bridge, wings spread wide, and began to sing. Not in Keth, inhuman, one by one his crew followed. Across the fleet, neural shrouds sparked and died. Pilots wept. Gunners opened fire not on the asteroid, but on their own dampening arrays, desperate to let the music in. In the core chamber, Elias played as if his fingers were on fire. He no longer conducted, he channeled. The asteroid sang with a voice older than its stone, older than its miners, older than the species that had carved it. The nebula outside folded into the chord, becoming visible sound, auroras dancing in the shape of human hands reaching for alien ones. Rafa's drum kept perfect time, small but unbreakable. Mara's cello wept blood from split horsehair, but she did not stop. Kesh rerouted the last reserves of power, voice cracking over the comm. "Core temperature critical. 30 seconds before we melt. Make it count, composer." Elias felt the end coming, not defeat, but crescendo. He stood on the bench, arms wide, and sang the final phrase himself. Raw, wordless, the sound a soul makes when it chooses love over survival. The asteroid detonated, not with fire but with light. A sphere of pure harmonic radiance expanded from 77 Theta, swallowing the fleet, the nebula, the silence itself. Every ship of the Eidolon choir was caught in it, not destroyed, but unmade and remade. Hull plates vibrated into chimes. Weapons arrays became organ pipes. The singularity drives at their hearts began to pulse like hearts of their own. Vale's flagship broadcast the melody back, amplified 1,000-fold, no longer a warship but a cathedral flying through space on wings of sound. Inside the expanding sphere, Elias felt no pain, only peace so complete it felt like flying. He saw his sister waiting, smiling. He saw his mother humming the lullaby that had started everything. He saw Rafa's paper flower blooming into galaxies. And behind them all, vast and wordless, the quiet intelligence that had listened since the first note of creation inclined its head, not in approval, not in judgment, but in recognition. "Well done, child," it seemed to say. You remembered the song. The light consumed him. When it faded, asteroid 77 Theta was gone. In its place floated a new star, small, perfect, singing. And across the galaxy, 12 dreadnoughts that had come to enforce silence turned as one and set course for the council capital, broadcasting a single, unending chord of welcome. The new star burned where Harmony Haven had been, a white-blue newborn no larger than a moon, yet already the brightest object in the sector. It did not roar, it sang. A single, sustained chord, Elias' final phrase, poured from its heart in every direction, riding gravity waves, tachyons, and something older than physics. Wherever it touched, silence died. Aboard the former flagship final measure, now renamed Mercy's Voice, High Harmonist Vale stood on the bridge without armor, without rank insignia, feathers trembling in the wind of ventilation that now carried music instead of orders. His crew, Keth, Thren, Kale, even a handful of human defectors, worked in reverent quiet, rerouting every system to amplify the star's song. Vale stared at the newborn sun on the main screen and felt something he had no word for. His people had outlawed emotion for 12,000 years. Now emotion had outlawed them. "Harmonist," a young Kethenson whispered, voice thick, "the capital is responding. They've raised the silent veil, full planetary dampening field. They're preparing to mute the star itself." Vale closed his eyes. He saw Elias Sato one last time, not the fugitive, but the man on the bench, arms wide, singing with a voice that cracked open galaxies. "Then we will bring the star to them," Vale said softly. Full burn, all 12 ships, we go home. The fleet turned, engines no longer cold fusion but living resonance, and leapt toward the council capital at speeds that made navigators weep. 300 light-years away, on the throne-world Coda Prime, the silent spire shuddered. The Council of Nine sat in emergency session beneath a dome of absolute acoustic nullification, a void so complete that even heartbeats were stolen before they could echo. Yet every member felt the vibration in their bones, an approaching chord that grew louder with every passing minute. High Arbitrator Thalcor, a towering silicon-based Thren whose facets normally reflected perfect order, cracked along a hairline fracture that bled light. "This is impossible," it intoned, voice like grinding glaciers. "Resonance cannot propagate through the veil." "It already has," replied Counselor Asara, a methane breather whose sphere was frosting over with fear. "Our outer colonies are singing. Our children are singing. The humans' requiem is inside the planetary crust. The spire itself is beginning to hum." The youngest member, a human collaborator named Director Cashin Vale, once celebrated for delivering Earth's surrender, stood pale at the edge of the circle. His neural damper had melted hours ago. He could hear everything now, every suppressed lullaby, every prayer from a dying world, every note Elias Sato had ever written. He stepped forward, voice shaking. "We were wrong," he said. The words tasted like treason and salvation. "We thought we were protecting the galaxy from chaos. We were protecting ourselves from feeling. But feeling is the only thing that ever made any of us real." Thalcor turned its fractured gaze on him. "You would betray order for sentiment. I would betray lies for truth," Cashin said, and pulled a small, forbidden music player from his robe. It was ancient, pre-bands Terran made, the kind children once used to share songs under blankets. He pressed play. A single piano note, Elias' final phrase, filled the chamber. The silent veil flickered. Across Coda Prime, a billion suppressed beings lifted their heads as one. In the undercities, human janitors began to hum. In the aviaries, Keth nestlings trilled melodies their parents had never taught them. In the crystalline gardens, Thren children touched their elders and felt them shatter, not from violence, but from joy too sharp to contain. The dome above the council cracked in a perfect circle, as though the sky itself had decided to sing. And then the fleet arrived. 12 dreadnoughts dropped out of jump directly above the capital, no longer weapons but cathedrals, their hulls glowing with the newborn star's light. They did not fire. They simply opened every transmitter, every airlock, every soul aboard, and let the chord pour down onto the planet like rain after centuries of drought. On the Bridge of Mercy's voice, Vale watched the silent veil collapse in real time, black hexagonal fields dissolving into rainbow mist as the music touched them. He spread his wings wide and sang with a voice he had never used before, raw and broken and beautiful. Below, the spire, the tallest structure in known space, symbol of eternal order, began to sway. Cashin Vale walked out of the council chamber into the plaza where millions now gathered. He raised the music player above his head, volume at maximum, and the final movement of ashes still rolled across the capital like dawn. People wept, people danced, people forgave. In the heart of the newborn star, 300 light-years away, something shifted. Elias Sato opened his eyes. He was not dead. He floated in a space that had no walls, no up or down, only light and music. The Steinway drifted beside him, keys glowing softly. Round him, every soul who had sung with him in the asteroid's final moments floated too. Mara, Kesh, Rafa, the Thren choir, the Kale elder, all untouched by vacuum, all radiant. Rafa waved, grinning, paper flower still tucked behind his ear. Mara's voice came as if from everywhere and nowhere. "Told you we'd finish it together." Elias looked out, truly looked, and saw the galaxy laid bare like sheet music. Every star a note, every nebula a rest, every black hole a fermata holding its breath. And at the center of it all, vast beyond comprehension, the quiet intelligence that had listened since the beginning. It did not speak. It simply inclined its head, and Elias understood. The song was not over. It had only just begun. He turned to his people, his choir, his family, and smiled the first unburdened smile of his adult life. "Ready for the encore?" he asked. 311 voices answered as one. Somewhere in the real world, the newborn star flared brighter, and a single piano note, clear, perfect, human, rang out across the capital like the first breath after drowning. The Council of Nine stepped down from their thrones, one by one, and joined the crowd in the plaza. Order did not fall that day. Silence did. The newborn star hung above Coda Prime like a second sun, white gold and steady, pouring a single sustained chord into the planet's bones. Every street, every spire, every heart now carried the same frequency. Silence had become impossible. Even the wind sounded like strings. In the great plaza beneath the cracked silent spire, millions stood shoulder to shoulder, wing to tentacle to crystalline limb. They were not a mob. They were a choir that had simply forgotten it was one. High Arbitrator Thalcor, once the most feared voice in the galaxy, knelt in the dust beside a human child who offered him a paper flower made from shredded arrest warrants. The ancient Thren's facets reflected the star's light in slow, weeping rainbows. He took the flower with trembling fingers of living stone and placed it against the fracture in his chest. The crack sealed, not perfectly, but enough. Director Cassian Vale stood on the steps of the fallen council dais, arms raised, conducting nothing and everything. The music no longer needed instruments. It lived in the air itself, and above them all the 12 dreadnoughts of the former Eidolon choir drifted in perfect geostationary orbit, their hulls now open like cathedral windows, broadcasting the star's chord in every direction. No weapons, no shields, only welcome. In the place beyond places, where light and sound were the same substance, Elias Sato stood at the Steinway that was no longer wood and ivory, but the axis of creation itself. Around him floated the 311 who had sung the asteroid into a star. Mara tuned an invisible cello with a smile that held no more scars. Kesh's 6 hands rested on keys made of nebulae. Rafa sat on the bench beside Elias, legs swinging, drumming softly on the lid with fingers that left trails of light. Elias looked out across the galaxy and saw it the way a composer sees a score before the first rehearsal, every possibility, every pain, every grace written in starlight. He felt the quiet intelligence watching, patient as gravity, loving as breath. A single question formed in the silence between heartbeats. What now? The answer came not in words, but in motion. The newborn star pulsed once, gentle, deliberate, and a ribbon of pure music arced away from it, threading through space like a golden river. Where it touched, dormant things woke. On Earth, in the glassed ruins of Vienna, the melted remains of the Musikverein's great organ began to cool and reform, pipes rising from slag like metal flowers. A single intact key, an A above middle C, sounded by itself, and the wind carried it across continents of ash. On Proxima IV, the refugee camp where Elias had first written Ashes Still Sing, the scorched earth cracked open and water, clear, cold, singing rose in fountains no one had dug. On 1,000 forgotten worlds, instruments long buried in mass graves began to play themselves. Violins with no strings, drums skinned with the memory of hands, flutes carved from the bones of the brave. The ribbon reached Coda Prime and split into countless threads, each one seeking a throat, a hand, a heart. Cassian Vale felt one settle around his neck like a stole. He opened his mouth, and the first note that came out was not his own. It was Elias' mother's lullaby, the one that had started everything. Around him, millions joined, voices rising in languages dead and living, alien and human, until the sky itself seemed to inhale. In the place beyond places, Elias lifted his hands. This one's not for war, he said softly. This one's for mourning. He began to play. It was simple, 4 chords. A melody any child could hum, but it carried every grief ever sung, every hope ever buried, every small act of courage that had kept humanity breathing when the galaxy said stop. The newborn star brightened until it outshone Coda Prime's ancient sun. Across the galaxy, beings who had never known music stopped whatever they were doing, hunting, hiding, hating, healing, and listened. Some wept, some laughed, some simply stood very still, as though afraid the beauty might break if they moved. On the bridge of Mercy's voice, Vale spread his wings until they ached, and sang with a voice that cracked centuries of tradition wide open. He sang for every world he had helped silence. He sang for every child he had never allowed to cry. The ribbon of music reached the edge of the observable universe and did not stop. It looped back, braided itself into the cosmic microwave background, etched itself into the first light that had ever traveled the void. And in that moment, every sentient being, past, present, and future, heard the same 4 chords and understood without translation that they had never been alone. Elias played the final phrase. It was the resolution he had once been afraid to write. Not triumph, not tragedy, just truth. We are here, we were afraid. We sang anyway. The newborn star dimmed, not dying, but settling, like a singer taking a satisfied breath after the last note. The place beyond places began to dissolve, edges softening into ordinary starlight. Mara touched Elias' shoulder. Time to go home, composer. He looked at her, eyes shining. Where's that? She smiled, nodded toward the galaxy now glowing with a soft, perpetual chord. Everywhere the music reached. One by one, the 311 began to fade, returning not as ghosts but as living notes in a song that would never end. Rafa hugged Elias' leg, then ran laughing into the light, paper flower-trailing comets. Kesh saluted with all 6 hands, tendrils bright as sunrise. Mara was last. She kissed Elias once, fierce, brief, grateful, then stepped back, bow raised in eternal salute. Only Elias remained, hands still on the keys that were now simply keys again. The quiet intelligence leaned close, not a figure, not a face, just presence vast enough to hold every sorrow and every joy without breaking. Thank you, it seemed to say, for reminding my children how to sing. Elias smiled, tired and whole. Thank you, he answered, for giving us something worth singing about. The Steinway dissolved into fireflies of light. Elias stepped forward into the glow, and somewhere in the ordinary dark between ordinary stars, a single piano began to play a lullaby older than empires, softer than mercy, loud enough to wake the dead. The galaxy woke up humming, not in metaphor. Every child, every elder, every methane breather drifting in crystal sleep, every thread dreaming in slow facets of light, woke with the same four chords caught behind their teeth like the taste of dawn. On Coda Prime, the silent spire lay in orderly pieces across the plaza, but no one mourned it. They were too busy singing. Old enemies stood wing to wing, voices braided into harmonies that had no name in any language yet invented. Someone had dragged the council's great harmonic bell from the rubble, cracked and useless for silence, and turned it into a drum. A human girl no older than Rafa beat it with a femur of rebar, and the sound rolled across the capital like laughter after a funeral. High Arbitrator Thalcor, once the coldest mind in known space, carried the girl on his stone shoulders so she could see farther. His facets reflected 10,000 upturned faces, and for the first time in 12 millennia he felt warm. Director Cashin Vale, traitor, redeemer, fool, saint, walked the streets handing out paper flowers made from the last of the ban edicts. Each one carried a single line in Elias Sato's handwriting, copied by 1,000 trembling hands. You were always allowed to sing. No one ruled anymore. No one needed to. The 12 dreadnoughts hung in orbit like iron cathedrals, airlocks open, ramps down. Pilots ferried people up to see the newborn star that still burned where Harmony Haven had been. They called it Sato's Rest. Some left flowers that drifted forever in the light, some left instruments, some simply stood in silence that was no longer empty and listened to the chord that had replaced gravity. And Elias was everywhere. He woke inside a farmer on Elysium who had never held a violin, yet found his fingers shaping perfect arpeggios in the dirt while he plowed. He woke inside a Kethnest mother on the capital's outskirts, teaching her clutch a lullaby that tasted like mercy. He woke inside Rafa, now 10 years older, paper flower still tucked behind one ear, who stood on the bridge of Mercy's voice and conducted passing asteroids into counterpoint with nothing but a smile. He woke most often inside ordinary moments, a Thren child discovering tears, a human soldier laying down a rifle to pick up a flute carved from its barrel, a Kale elder exhaling methane rings that spelled thank you across a sunset no one had bothered to watch in centuries. He never spoke with his old voice again. He didn't need to. The galaxy had learned the words. Years passed 10, 50, 100. Empires did not rise. They dissolved into song. Borders became shared verses. Wars became duets that ended in hugs instead of graves. Children were born who had never known silence and never would. On the 100th anniversary of the day the stars first hummed, a quiet ceremony was held at Sato's Rest. No speeches, no monuments, just music. A single piano drifted out of the star's light, real this time, wood and ivory and scars. It settled onto a platform of frozen sound waves, open, waiting. One by one they came, Vale, feathers snow-white with age, Thalcor, cracks filled with gold, Cashin Vale, hair gone silver but eyes young, and Rafa tall now, voice rich as earth after rain, carrying Mara's old cello. They did not play Ashes Still Sing. That song had finished its work. Instead, Rafa sat at the keys. He was never taught, yet his hands remembered everything Elias had known. He played a new piece, simple, almost childlike, 4 chords again. A melody that asked a question and then answered it with wonder. Across the galaxy, every living soul felt the invitation and answered. The newborn star flared once, gently like a proud parent watching a child take its first step. And somewhere in the place beyond places where light and sound are the same eternal note, Elias Sato stood beside the quiet intelligence that had listened since the beginning. He was older now, or younger. Time had lost its meaning. His scars were gone, but the crucifix still hung at his throat, warm as breath. He watched the galaxy sing the song his hands had only started. The intelligence inclined its head, not in worship, not in command, simply in recognition. They learned, Elias whispered, tears that were not tears shining in eyes that had seen everything. They always had it in them, came the answer, vast and wordless and fond. You just reminded them where the music was kept. Elias smiled, the same tired, fierce, unbreakable smile he had worn the night he first defied the council. Ready for the next movement? He asked. The intelligence opened what might have been arms, what might have been wings, what might have been the entire embrace of creation. Always, together, composer and composer, note and author, they turned toward whatever came after the final measure, when the song no longer needed sheet music or stars or even throats to carry it. Because by then the universe itself had learned the words by heart, and somewhere in a cradle on a small blue planet that had once been forbidden to sing, a newborn baby opened its eyes, took its first breath, and began without hesitation to hum the lullaby that had saved everything. The stars leaned close to listen, and the song human, alien, divine, defiant, tender, eternal went on.